Okay, so this week we're going to have a look at some of the Arnold settings of tools in Maya. So that's going to include three separate elements, I guess. Arnold rendering, Arnold lighting, and Arnold materials, Arnold texture mapping. Okay, so to begin with, before we do any of those things, we really need to give ourselves a scene to sort of play around with. So I'm going to give myself a nice flat ground plane, which we can see there. I'm going to use R on my keyboard to give me the scale tools. Scale it up. I'd like to get rid of this grid system here, so it's not getting in the way there. So we'll do that just by clicking here. It turns the grid on and off. And then on top of this, I'm just going to give myself some very basic rudimentary sort of bits of geometry, so something like that will do. Nothing too fancy, but it's purely just about having an environment to work with. I might just scale up just a touch, then we can just have that kind of sat plonked on the surface there. I'll have a box. I think it's made that quite small, so we'll scale that one up. And it's important for now that I do have these kind of sat on the surface, so I should be going into another view to do that, shouldn't I, just to help me out. See that one there, that one's kind of sat on the ground plane. Back into this view, and I think we'll have maybe one more surface, something like that, which I'll just move out of the way slightly so we can see it. I'll probably just bring it around this side here. Now, the reason I've chosen these three is that they're all quite different. They're quite different in the kind of shape that they are, or kind of geometry that they are. They've all got different types of faces. So some the spherical faces are kind of omnidirectional. There's curvature in every direction. Cylinder, there's a flat top on and then curvature around the sides, and obviously our box there is a series of 6 flat surfaces. So using something like that is quite useful to be able to test out some texture maps, and that's ultimately what we're going to do. So I'm just going to give myself a little setup, something like this, a little gap between the two so I can see what's going on there. Something like this, and then we'll have a look at some textures that we'll add to this. Okay, so if we select any one of these, we'll see that we have by default got some settings in here. One of them will be that it's got a Lambert material applied to it. Now, if we wanted to, we could change from Lambert to something like Arnold. However, you'll see in there, it's currently blanked out. It won't let me change the type to Arnold. So we'll have a look and see what we can do about that. What we'll do is we'll go into our materials area here in our hypershade menu, and we'll make ourselves a brand new Arnold surface. Okay, so if we look down the left hand side here, we've got Arnold, which is just there. We'll click on that. We want something which is a shader. We want a surface shader, and we want an AI standard surface. That's what we're going to go for, AI standard surface, which has now been added in there. So AI standard surface. So we've got that created. We should now be able to go in to each of these, and we should be able to add ourselves that material to those. So with them all selected, I'm going to right click. Then we're going to go to assign existing material AI standard surface. And we should find that when we select any one of these, or indeed all of them at the same time, we've now got AI standard surface in there rather than that Lambert that we would have had before in our list down here. So if you find it doesn't give you the drop down list, sometimes you've got to force it along and make it do it. Now I'm also going to apply a separate material to the ground plane here. In fact, what I'll do is probably leave it Lambert for now, a standard Lambert for that, but these I want all to have that AI standard surface material. Okay, so I'm going to go in to this one, in the AI standard surface 1 material, which is applied to all three of them, and I'm going to start to look at some of these options that we've got. Now I could call that up on my menu here, and I could play around with some of them in here, but I find that this actually takes up a lot of room on the screen there. But I mean, I'm working on a MacBook, which is a little bit of a smaller surface area to deal with. So let's continue on anyway with this side panel. Same thing. Okay, now anywhere you see weight just means amount of that thing. So for us, the base color is this. It just means it's a set color. So if we were to go in there and say we'll make this sort of a bluey purple color, you can see it's done that. So it's just a base color, a ground sort of color. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to give us, maybe I'll go for blue actually. So maybe a subtle, let's have a look, not too dark. Maybe something like that will work reasonably well. That'll do. Okay, so we'll have something like that. The weight, you can see there, is then how much of that color is added to our object. So I'll take that back up here. Now some of these, however, you're not going to notice too much what it actually does in the viewport. So what I tend to do is say, before we start tinkering with these, is have a very, very quick introduction to the Arnold tab in here and start to look at some of the rendering options that we've got in here. So we'll just hover over here. We've got two options here. We've got Arnold render view, or just render. What we want is render view. Okay, now render view allows us to have a real-time update on our scene here, but like a rendered version, a more complete, higher res sort of version. Now you'll see at the moment, unless we click this, we'll see nothing, and sometimes you'll also still see nothing. So it's important that we start to look at just a few of the settings to make sure that everything's functioning. Now, yes, we want perspective. Yes, we do want the beauty pass, that's a full render, but yet we're still getting nothing. Now if you click in here, just left click, you can see these elements do exist. They are in there, but the problem we've got is that they're just not illuminated. There's not enough light in that scene to be able to see them, to be able to see any sort of interaction on the surfaces, so highlight, shade, and so on. So what we're going to do is just add some really subtle lights in there so we can start to see that stuff take place. Okay, I'm just going to go into my separate views, if it will let me. It doesn't seem to want to let me at the moment. What's going on? Anyway, we'll click on there, that'll do the same thing. We're going to add some lights in there. I'm going to go something like, let's have a look. I might not even go into Arnold lights. I might just go into standard sorts of lights actually, because I think it's probably going to be a little bit easier to work with. So I'm just going to go to create lights, and I'm just going to have a point light, I think. So let's drop that in there. Now I don't know if you can see on there, it just subtly updated something in there. Okay, so anyways, I'm going to pull that off to one side. In this view, I'm just going to lift it up. I don't know about on your screen, but on mine I can just see as a little highlight appeared on here. So that tells me that the light is functioning. See it moving around as I do this kind of thing. But the problem is, of course, it's just not intense enough. Okay, so we're just going to up the intensity so we can start to see something in the scene. Sometimes this is just not enough, so we'll go quite large on our value. There we are, so 500, and that's starting to give me a little bit more of an indication of something going on screen. So for me, 500 worked. For you, you might have to play around with the smaller values, maybe larger values, but all that was the addition of a point light. Now the point light, again, just allows me to see a full rendered version of what I'm seeing in the viewport, so the perspective view that I've chosen. So I'm going to go back into that view. Doesn't seem to, that's it. Just so I can have my live updates as I go along. I'm going to very, very slightly just push this off to one side, purely so I can see what's going on in here. Now, I'm going to go back to my AI standard surface and we'll have a look at what difference some of these things make in here. I'm going to move this back across actually, because we don't really need to be able to interact with this, as long as we can see our live update. Okay, so other things that we're going to look at, obviously we said weight, adjust the weight, you can see what that does. The color we've already looked at. Let's have a look at roughness and metalness. Okay, so the first one here, or rather the third one down, but the first one after color, is diffuse roughness. Now, basically, when you've got base color, another name for that is actually diffuse, like a diffuse color, or sometimes we have like a diffuse map, which would be like a texture map that would apply to something. So sometimes they use interchangeable, but usually kind of diffuse is the name of the color of an object. So diffuse roughness is how rough the surface is. So sometimes it will just very slightly rough up the surface, make it a little bit less polished. So we'll just up that and we'll see what we get. Now you probably will see as we up that, it appears to get a little bit darker in this view here, and that really is, I mean, to my mind, that really is a case of it just because it's a roughened surface, it's receiving less kind of consistent light across it. That's probably the best way to look at that. To be honest, it's very rare that I would use that. So we'll push that all the way back up. I am going to just lighten up just a touch this this color, because I'm just a bit conscious it's but I might even go to a different color altogether. That's it. It's a little bit brighter now. We'll go with that one. That's fine. Okay, so I'll just pop that down there. Nope, we've lost that. I think I must have clicked OK. And try again. I think I clicked revert by accident. Just go in here and do it. There we go. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. Okay, so metalness. Is it like, I'm not sure that's the right name for it, actually, metalness. But it's about the way that the texture behaves. So more metalness makes something much shinier, much more specular. Okay, so if we just up that, you can see it's a little bit more reflective. So when I say specular, I should say more reflective, really. So push it all the way there, and it's super polished, super reflective. You can see that it's reflecting the black of the background. You've got the black there, or the darkness of this box here, because obviously that side's out of light. It's in shadow, that, so you get the black side, and so on and so forth there. So it just adds a little bit more reflectiveness to things there. Next we've got specular. So again, the weight of that will allow you to reduce the specularity, which is kind of like the shininess. So if you reduce it all the way down to 0, this becomes very matte. There's no shininess, there's no specularity to it. Start to add some and become more and more specular. So we'll add that up there. You can change the color of the specularity. So if I push that towards something like this, you can see the highlight is taking on a different color. You can see a little bit of the red spilling off down these sides as well. I'm going to push that back to white again, because I really do not want that to be that color. Again, the roughness. If we work on the roughness there, there's a much more obvious effect on this. A low level of roughness, which means it's not very rough, kind of bobbly surface or anything, will give you a very, very polished looking material. So think of a highly polished ball, or snooker ball, pool ball type thing. If you push this the other way, it becomes much more diffused, rougher surface, and I don't want to go too far, otherwise you're going to lose the specularity, but it becomes a little bit rougher type surface. So something which is a little bit kind of scuffed up, a bit dirtied up maybe, so it's not highly polished. Okay, so that's a measure that you're going to have to work with yourself to get the right kind of setting. I want to go about 0.2, kind of interesting. I'm also just going to push my angle here and see if I can get a little bit of a specularity on this. I can't. I think actually what I'm doing here is perhaps not altering all of the materials for all of these. Oh, it is showing as such, but I'm just not getting a highlight on the side of this. Don't know why. Anyway, it doesn't really matter, as long as we can see what's going on in our render view. I'm not so bothered. Okay, so index of refraction, that's more to do when you're working with refraction. Okay, so if you add like a transparent orb or a bubble or something like that, and you know that refraction is the idea that light gets very slightly pushed off and refracted as it moves, in terms of the angle of its entry gets refracted, i.e. the angle changes, and therefore you get distortion through glass or through a bubble or something of that sort, through water even. So the index of refraction is a mathematically kind of calculated element which will say how much it refracts. So for now we'll leave that, because we're not really looking at transparency of objects. Anisotropy, that's again, it basically it narrows down. You can see there it narrows down the highlight. So it makes it look perhaps a little bit more like brush metal or something, where you're going to get a kind of a pulled or elongated sort of highlight, something of that sort. The rotation is just rotating the angle of that. Now, it doesn't work on a 0 to 360 degrees setup. It is between 0 and 1. So you can just about see, as I'm going around here, how you're starting to get some highlight. In fact, you can see on there as well now. So 0.5 would be like a 90-degree rotation. 0.25. Sorry, 0.5 will be 180 degree rotation, 0.25 will be a 90 degree, something like that. Okay, I'll leave it back to where we started. Okay, so I actually don't want any of that. I want a normal sort of a highlight on there. The next thing we're going to have a look at is transmission. I'm just going to have a look at this. Now, the idea of transmission is the way that light travels through an object, is transmitted through an object. So that is where, if I just up this, you would start to get some transparency through the object, which is where the index of refraction would come into play. Okay. So again, you can play around with some of these things. I don't want to go into too much detail about this at the moment, but you can start to play around with that. So again, so just remember that transmission is about the way that a light travels through an object. So if it was glass or something. Subsurface, that's where you can look at multiple layered up surfaces of an object. The classic example is human skin. So as light travels through the first dermal layer of human skin, the light is very slightly refracted and bounces around inside. It travels through the different layers of the skin and is bounced around a little bit. So there's what we call subsurface scattering, for example, the scattering of the light through the multiple surfaces or multiple layers. So subsurface just allows you to say that there's multiple layers, one layer beneath another. So human skin, wax is a good example of that, how light can travel and bounce around and so on. Again, something you could play around with. Something like that, it tends to be more useful if you've got alternate colors. So if you've got alternate colors for things in there, something like that, you can see there's kind of there's a surface on top, but it looks like there's a slightly reddish sort of glow underneath it. See, there's kind of multiple layers. It's very, very useful for when you are, again, simulating human skin and so on. I'm going to leave that be for now because it's not really something we need, but that's that one. Coat is probably the other one we'll look at. I think the rest we'll probably leave be for now. We may look at some more later on, maybe geometry one we might look at a little later on. But something like this one, we're looking at a kind of having like a coating, like a sheen over the top of the base color that you've got. Classic example is paintwork, usually car body paintwork. Okay, that's a good example of something like that. So again, you could have like a sheen over the top, which again you may have in a slightly different color or something. Probably not the ideal example when we got a kind of a fairly garish sort of greeny blue under there. If you had something like that where you kind of got like white underneath and a kind of a pinky sort of coating over the top, you'd have this very glossy sort of maybe painterly type material on there. Which of course you could have a look at specular and maybe add something like that to make it look a little bit more like maybe it's got the odd scratch in it or something of that sort. Again, maybe bring the specularity down, or maybe the roughness up. You can start to get something probably a little bit more interesting. But of course, one of the beauties of something like this is you've actually got presets as well. So again, we'll just go back to this. I'm not really going to go into any more of these things until probably a little bit later. But when you're working here, you've got presets. So you have actually got car paint. So if we replace our current material with that, rather than blending it, giving it like 10% car paint, 90% whatever material we had before, we just replace that, and we end up with something which is a little bit more car painterly, for example. Or we could have metallic, that sort, quite nicely. Other presets, something like a bubble, that sort. You can probably just about see it. Something like that probably definitely needs a little bit more highlight on there, a little bit more specularity. Let's have a look. Gold maybe. Pretty good. So have a play around with those presets. See if there's anything you like the look of. It's worth knowing that they exist. Okay, so again, those are the presets, but essentially what we've done there is we've had a look at the Arnold standard surface material. There are other Arnold materials which we can play around with, but not for now. So get used to the fact that when you're putting together a material, there are a great many attributes and things that you can control and play around with. So spend maybe 5 more minutes just having a little tinker around with them, see what you can come up with. You're not really going to break anything in there. If you do, you can always go, add a brand new material to your object or something like that, reset sort of thing. Okay, in the next video clip, we'll have a look at what the next step actually is when you're dealing with these things, and that's going to be playing around with opacity and also looking at probably some refraction as well, because once we've got opacity, then we can start to look at refraction, so maybe looking at glass type things. Okay, see you then.